I've always thought disappointment has a smell. For me, it smelled like cold pad thai and burnt coffee in my cramped Portland studio apartment. That morning, my birthday morning, I was sitting cross-legged on a futon with my laptop balanced on a wobbly IKEA table, trying to convince myself that freelancing was a lifestyle choice and not just unemployment dressed up with hashtags. The radiator hissed in the corner like it was mocking me. 400 square feet of dreams that never got off the ground. I was eating straight from the carton when my phone buzzed. Mom? Her voice had that syrupy, careful tone she used whenever she wanted me to accept bad news politely, like I was a child she was bribing with cookies. Daniel, honey, we need to talk about something. I already knew what was coming. When you've spent nearly 3 decades as the family's afterthought, you develop a radar for these things. But I wasn't ready for the exact words that followed. Your father and I have decided to help Tyler with a down payment on a house. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Okay. I tried to sound casual. That's great for Tyler. Mom didn't stop. She never did. We're giving him $100,000. I nearly dropped my phone into my noodles. 100,000. The number rang in my ears like a fire alarm. My mind immediately started doing survival math. How many months of rent? How many student loan payments? How many years of groceries? I tried to keep my voice steady. So, just to clarify, you're giving Tyler 100 grand for a house, and for me, you're giving silence. Not even the polite kind. The kind that's loud enough to make your heart beat faster. Finally, Mom said, Daniel, you're in a very different place than Tyler. He has a stable career, a serious relationship, a plan. You're still finding yourself. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Finding myself? I'm 28, not 17 on a gap year in Europe. But she steamrolled past me. You've always been so independent. We knew you'd understand. Independent. That word again. A word they'd weaponized into a prettier way of saying neglected. I hung up minutes later, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. And as I sat there in that little shoebox of an apartment, surrounded by peeling paint and unpaid bills, I realized this wasn't about the money. Not really. This was about years of being the family disappointment, about every tiny moment where I'd been told without words, "You're not enough." Memories came flooding back, memories I usually kept locked away. Tyler with his sun-blonde hair, Mom calling him her little sunshine, while I brown-haired, quieter, softer, was practical at best, invisible at worst. Tyler's football trophies lined up on the mantel like royal medals, while my jazz band certificates were stuffed into drawers. I thought of the time I stayed up for weeks designing a poster for a national art contest. Out of 3,000 entries, I'd placed second. My dad barely glanced at it before saying, "Well, at least you tried." A week later, Tyler came in fourth at a swim meet and got a brand new laptop. And on my birthday, my day, they celebrated Tyler's house. I set my chopsticks down, pushed the half-eaten noodles aside, and stared at the blank wall of my apartment. The ache in my chest wasn't just about $100,000. It was about a lifetime of being the understudy in my own family's play. That night, I went for a walk through Portland's rainy streets, hood pulled low, headphones blasting just to drown out my thoughts. I found myself wandering past shop windows I couldn't afford to buy from, watching couples laughing inside restaurants where I'd never once taken myself for a birthday dinner. And all I could think was, what does it take to be enough for them? The answer came to me like a cold gust of wind. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Growing up in my house was like watching a rigged game play out every single day. Tyler was born 3 years before me, and from the moment he could walk, the spotlight was his. Blonde hair that seemed to catch sunlight like a halo, an easy grin, that natural confidence that people mistake for leadership. He was the son parents brag about to their friends at barbecues. Me? I was the side note, brown-haired, quieter, the kid who always needed to try harder. It wasn't that I was lazy. I worked. God, did I work. When I was 15, I poured every ounce of myself into a national graphic design competition. 3 months of sketching, drafting, redrawing until my hands cramped and my eyes blurred. Out of 3,000 entries, I came in second in the country. Dad's response? Well, at least you tried your best. I'll never forget how the words landed like a wet blanket smothering a fire. A week later, Tyler came in fourth at a regional swim meet, and Dad bought him a brand new laptop. That was the pattern. Tyler got trophies displayed in the living room, framed photos from his football games. I got my drawings moved from the fridge to a basement wall, the art wall, Mom called it. But even as a teenager, I knew it was just the place where things were hung to die quietly out of sight. There's a particular sting in knowing your parents' love comes with conditions. For Tyler, the condition was simple: exist. For me, it was perform miracles, and even then, expect a shrug. I remember one Thanksgiving, Tyler had just started dating Jessica, the homecoming queen. He brought her to dinner, and my parents couldn't stop fawning. Mom whispered to her, "You're going to be such a beautiful daughter-in-law one day." Meanwhile, I was sitting at the other end of the table, invisible, my Xbox waiting at home like the only thing in the world happy to see me. Even relatives bought into the golden boy myth. Aunts slipped Tyler extra cash at Christmas. Uncles talked business with him while I was told, "You'll figure it out eventually." It wasn't just favoritism. It was systemic. It was in the way Tyler's smallest achievements were paraded like royal decrees, while mine were brushed aside with polite indifference. It was in the way family friends always asked about him first, and when they finally turned to me, it was with that tight, sympathetic smile, reserved for lost causes. Looking back, I think what hurt most wasn't even Tyler's privilege. It was watching my parents light up when he walked into a room in a way they never did for me. That glow, the "we are so proud of you" glow, I chased it like oxygen, and every time I thought I'd earned it, it slipped through my fingers. And yet, part of me kept trying. I think every overlooked kid does. No matter how much you tell yourself you don't care, deep down you still want your parents to see you, to say that's our child and we're proud. But in our house, pride was a currency they spent only on Tyler, and I learned early that no matter how hard I worked, my account would always stay empty. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were supposed to feel like tradition, home-cooked meals, laughter, a family gathering that kept us close. In reality, they were performances. 2 hours where Tyler played the star, and I played the understudy, smiling at the right moments while quietly counting down until I could leave. That particular Sunday, Tyler was in rare form. He leaned back in his chair, passing the mashed potatoes with a grin that belonged in a real estate brochure. "Jess and I have been looking at houses," he announced, as if the table were an audience waiting for his big reveal. Dad perked up immediately. "Really? Where?" "Bellevue," Tyler said, casual as if Bellevue weren't the kind of neighborhood where starter homes cost $500,000. "Great area, but the down payments are insane." I watched the scene unfold like déjà vu. Dad leaned forward, eyes bright, the same way a golden retriever perks up at the word walk. "How much are we talking?" Tyler shrugged modestly. "Around 100,000 to avoid PMI. And then it happened. That look. The wordless exchange between Mom and Dad. The one that always meant they'd already made a decision. Dad cleared his throat, his voice heavy with satisfaction. "What if we helped?" The table seemed to glow around Tyler. He shook his head, pretending to protest. "Dad, I couldn't ask that." "You're not asking, we're offering," Dad said. Mom nodded, her smile soft. "It's time we helped our son build his future." Our son. Singular. I sat there, fork in hand, my food suddenly tasteless. They didn't even try to soften the blow, didn't look my way, didn't acknowledge the imbalance. It was like I wasn't even at the table. Finally, Mom turned toward me, guilt flickering across her face like a passing shadow. "Daniel, when you're ready to settle down." I cut her off before she could finish the sentence that was meant to sound inclusive, but felt like a slap. "I'm fine. This is great for Tyler." Tyler gave me that sheepish smile, the one he always used when he knew he was benefiting at my expense. "Thanks, Danny. I'm sure someday." "Totally," I said, forcing a grin. "When I'm not such a catastrophic failure." Laughter rippled weakly around the table, but I wasn't joking. Not really. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of Tyler's house hunting stories, square footage, mortgage rates, open houses. My parents hung on every word like he was announcing a moon landing. I stabbed at my green beans, nodding at the right moments, even chimed in once or twice just to play along. But inside, Inside, I was crumbling. I remember staring at the roast chicken on my plate, thinking about how many Sundays I'd sat at that very table, pretending not to notice the hierarchy that was as permanent as the furniture. Tyler's victories were centerpieces. My existence was garnish. By the time dessert came out, I'd already made a quiet vow. If this was what family looked like, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep showing up. And when Mom called on my birthday 3 months later, confirming that vow with one sentence, "We're giving Tyler $100,000, the decision was made for me. That night, after dinner ended, I drove home in silence, the city lights of Portland blurring through my windshield. I pulled into the cracked driveway of my studio apartment, sat in the car long after the engine shut off, and whispered to myself, "Never again. I won't keep being the extra at their table." When people imagine cutting ties with family, they picture fireworks, screaming matches, slammed doors, dramatic exits. For me, it was quieter than that. It was a slow fade, like turning the volume down on a song I'd been forced to listen to my whole life. After that birthday call, I realized something. I didn't owe them my presence. I didn't owe them another Sunday where I smiled politely while being erased. So I stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped putting energy into a relationship that had always been one-sided. At first, it felt strange. Muscle memory kicked in like when I saw a funny meme and instinctively reached for my phone to send it to Mom. I'd type out the text, stare at it, and then delete it. My finger hovered over call more times than I'd like to admit, but every time, the memory of that phone call snapped me back. $100,000 for Tyler. Maybe next week for me. And here's the thing. They didn't call me either. Not once. Not a, "Hey, how are you?" Not a, "We missed you at dinner." Just silence. The first Sunday I skipped dinner, I sat on my futon with takeout and Netflix. At 6 o'clock sharp, when I knew the roast chicken was being carved, I felt the familiar ache of being left out. By dessert time, I realized something startling. I didn't miss them. Not really. What I missed was the idea of them, the version of parents I'd never actually had. By the second week, the ache had dulled. By the third, it was gone. There's a weight you don't even know you're carrying until you set it down. For me, that weight was 28 years of trying to earn approval that was never coming. Without it, I felt lighter, freer, like I'd been walking around with a backpack full of rocks and finally shrugged it off. Of course, freedom doesn't pay rent. My apartment was still a 400-square-foot box where the walls seemed to sweat in summer and groan in winter. My bank account still lived on the edge of overdraft. Some nights, I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I should swallow my pride and go back, play my role, let them have their golden child, while I scraped for scraps of affection. But then I'd remember that birthday call, the silence after I asked what I was getting, the way they'd celebrated Tyler's house on the very day I was born, and the thought of walking back into that dining room, of sitting quietly while they toasted him, was unbearable. So I stayed away. The quiet gave me room to think, to breathe. For the first time, I wasn't measuring myself against Tyler. I wasn't sitting in a room where every conversation reminded me of my place in the hierarchy. One evening, I took a long walk through Portland's rain-soaked streets. The city glistened under neon lights, and for once, I wasn't haunted by the thought of what my parents would say about my choices. I was just me. Broke, tired, struggling but free. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window with the glass fogging from my breath. I whispered out loud, testing the words, "I don't need them." It wasn't entirely true yet, but it was getting closer. The funny thing about letting go of people who drain you is how much energy suddenly comes back. Without the constant pull of trying to impress my parents, I had space in my head I didn't know was there, and I poured it into work. Freelancing had always been a hustle. One week I was designing logos for garage bands who paid me in concert tickets. The next I was making Instagram graphics for influencers who thought exposure was a form of currency. Most days I wondered if I should just quit and apply at Starbucks. At least there I'd get health insurance. Then came Marcus. He owned a small coffee roasting company, middle-aged corporate burnout, the kind of guy who wore flannel year-round and spoke about beans like they were fine wine. He wanted a logo. Authentic but modern, he said. Rustic but clean, bold but subtle. In other words, impossible. For weeks, we went back and forth. I churned out revision after revision. 16 drafts later, I was exhausted. But on the 17th, something clicked. Minimalist lines, sharp contrast, nothing fancy, just simple and alive. I sent it off, half expecting another rejection. Instead, Marcus called me at 11 p.m. His gravelly voice buzzed with excitement. "Daniel, this is it. This is exactly it. How much do I owe you?" I'd quoted $800. For the hours I'd spent, it was laughable. I hesitated, then for once in my life, I didn't undersell myself. 1,200. A pause. My stomach dropped. Then Marcus said, "Done. And I'm opening a second location next year. Want the whole package? Branding, signage, everything. 15 grand. $15,000. I nearly choked on my own spit. When I hung up, I sat in my dark apartment staring at the wall, trying to process that someone, an actual client, valued my work that much. It was like oxygen rushing into lungs that had been starved for years. That project opened doors, word spread, other small businesses reached out. For the first time, I wasn't hustling for scraps. I was choosing projects that mattered. Within 6 months, I doubled my income. Enough that I could stop checking my bank account before buying groceries. Enough that I moved out of my depressing shoebox into a one-bedroom with an actual separate living space. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Around the same time, I met Sarah. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop, two freelancers fighting the terrible Wi-Fi. She was a copywriter, laptop plastered with stickers, messy bun that somehow looked perfect. Our first conversation was about internet outages, but it spiraled into hours of swapping war stories about clients who wanted infinite revisions for $50. It wasn't romantic at first, more like finding an ally in the trenches. We started meeting up for co-working sessions, bouncing ideas off each other, laughing at the absurdity of freelance life. But somewhere between late-night editing sessions and early morning coffees, the air shifted. One evening at her apartment, laptops glowing in the dim light, she set hers aside and looked straight at me. "I really like you. You know that?" My brain froze. Panic scrambled up my throat. Relationship skills? Non-existent. Sarah just laughed at my deer-in-headlights expression. "Relax. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." 2 weeks later, we were dating. Sarah was different. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't offer excuses for my parents' behavior. When I finally told her the story, the dollar, 100 kelvins, the birthday call, the years of being second best, she didn't say, "They meant well," or, "Maybe they love you in their own way." She just shook her head and said, "That's messed up. I'm sorry they did that to you." And for the first time, I felt something I'd never gotten from my own family: validation. It happened on a weekend that wasn't supposed to mean anything. Sarah and I had decided, last minute, to get out of the city and hike the Columbia River Gorge. Portland can close in on you: the drizzle, the constant hum of traffic, the feeling that life is passing you by while you grind away on your laptop. Out there, among trees older than our grandparents, I could finally breathe. The hike was supposed to be a reset. No work, no family talk, just nature. But the universe had other plans. On the way back, the GPS cut out. Sarah unfolded an actual paper map, her smirk half annoyed, half amused. "We're officially pioneers now," she joked. I laughed, but the truth was, we were lost. We circled the same abandoned barn twice, past blackberry thickets so dense they looked like fortresses, and then around a bend in the road we saw it. A hand-painted "for sale" sign, half hidden by weeds. Behind it, 5 acres of land stretched out like a secret waiting to be discovered. Towering evergreens, a small creek glinting in the distance, light filtering through branches like stained glass. I pulled over without thinking. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "This is how horror movies start." "Maybe," I said, already climbing out of the car. "But I want to look." The driveway was more of a dirt scar through blackberry bushes, but as I walked deeper onto the property, everything went quiet in that way only forests know how. Birds overhead, wind whispering through trees, the faint rush of water. And for the first time in years, I felt something dangerous, something intoxicating, possibility. The number on the sign was faded, but I snapped a picture and called the next day. The owner's name was Frank, a man in his 70s whose voice sounded like gravel and cigarettes. "You interested?" he asked. "Maybe. What's the price?" "45,000. I nearly dropped the phone again. 5 acres of land for less than half of what my parents had gifted Tyler, for less than the amount they deemed me unworthy of. I had 32,000 in savings, every cent scraped together from the last 18 months of hustling, eating ramen, saying no to family dinners. I tried. "Would you take 30? Frank chuckled. "Son, 45 is what I need to cover taxes and medical bills. Can't go lower." Fair. But that 13,000 gap felt like a canyon. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about that land. I'd lie awake at night, replaying the sound of the creek in my head, picturing a small cabin tucked between the trees. Not a mansion, not some dream house with marble countertops, just mine. Sarah noticed. She caught me scrolling through the blurry photos I'd taken for the 100th time. "You really want it, don't you?" she asked. "It doesn't matter. I can't afford it. What if I helped?" I froze. "Sarah, that's your money." "So?" she shrugged. "We've been talking about moving in together anyway. Why not make this our project? Something we build together literally." I hesitated. "And if it doesn't work out between us?" She was quiet for a beat. Then, calm as ever, she said, "Then we handle it like adults. Papers, contracts, whatever it takes." "But Daniel, you can't keep letting fear of failure stop you from wanting things. That's what your family did to you. Don't do it to yourself." She was right. God, she was right. That afternoon, we called Frank back. Offered 40,000, everything we could scrape together. 3 nail-biting days later, he agreed if we covered closing costs. The paperwork was endless. Inspections, signatures, title searches. But 2 months later, it was official. Frank shook my hand at the title office and handed me the weathered "For Sale" sign. "Good luck with it, son. You earned it." Walking out with Sarah, deed in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 7 years old. Drawing dragons on notebook paper while my mom taped them proudly to the fridge. Owning the land was only the beginning. What followed was sweat, splinters, and more YouTube tutorials than I care to admit. At first, Sarah and I just spent weekends clearing blackberry bushes and hauling out junk left behind by whoever had abandoned the property years ago. It was brutal work, mosquitoes feasting on our arms, mud caking our boots, but every wheelbarrow full of trash felt like peeling back a layer of neglect to reveal something alive beneath. At night, we'd collapse into my old futon, muscles aching but grinning. For once, exhaustion felt like progress. Still, 5 acres of raw land doesn't magically turn into a home. So I reached out to James, a young architect I'd met through freelancing. He had this restless energy, always talking about sustainable design and small footprint living. When I told him about the land, his eyes lit up like I'd just handed him a dream project. "Let's make it a showcase," he said. "I'll design a tiny off-grid cabin. You do all the branding for my firm in exchange. We both get something out of it." It was perfect. And over the next 6 months, plans turned into sketches. Sketches turned into lumber deliveries, and lumber turned into walls. The build wasn't glamorous. Construction never is. Some days I spent 10 hours hammering only to realize I'd measured wrong and had to start over. Other days, friends came to help Marcus from the coffee company, even brought his employees, trading their sweat for pizza and beer. Sarah painted, sanded, and cheered me on when I thought I'd break. There were moments I wanted to quit, when my hands blistered, when the rain seeped into my bones, when the budget ran thinner than I liked. But every nail I drove, every board I cut, carried a kind of defiance. I can do this without them. I can build something they never believed I could. By fall, the cabin stood complete. 600 square feet of stubborn hope, solar panels on the roof, a loft bedroom, rainwater collection system. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. James came out one golden evening with his camera. The photos looked like something out of a design magazine, light streaming through the trees, the cabin glowing against the forest backdrop. I hesitated, then posted one picture on Instagram. Caption, "Built this. Proud of it." It blew up. More likes than I'd ever gotten. Messages from strangers saying they dreamed of doing the same. For once, I wasn't invisible. And then fate, or irony, or maybe both, brought Tyler to my doorstep. He'd been hiking with friends, taken the same wrong turn Sarah and I had months before. He spotted my car, pulled over, and followed the dirt track until the cabin appeared. I was inside, screwing in cabinet hardware, when I heard his voice outside. "Dad, you need to see this right now," he was yelling into his phone. I stepped outside, heart pounding, to find him staring at the cabin, like it was an alien ship. His phone hung limp at his side. Our eyes met. "I'll call you back," he muttered into the receiver, then hung up. "What the hell is this, Danny?" I glanced at the cabin, then back at him. My voice was steady. This is mine." Tyler walked forward, circling the structure like he couldn't believe it was real. "You built this? How? Last I heard you were broke, living in that shoebox eating ramen." "That was 2 years ago," I said. "Things change." "But Dad gave me 100,000. You had nothing. How did you—" His voice trailed, disbelief clouding his face. "Turns out when you're not wasting your energy trying to win approval from people who don't care, you can actually accomplish something," I said quietly. Tyler opened his mouth to argue, but headlights cut down the dirt road. Dad's truck, Mom in the passenger seat, they'd come. When Dad stepped out, his expression was unreadable. Mom's eyes darted around, bewildered. "Daniel, what is this?" she asked, her voice wavering. "My property," I said. 5 acres, my cabin." Dad approached slowly, running his hand along the siding, examining the solar panels. "The design. You built this. With what money?" The words stung. Not "I'm proud of you." Just suspicion. Just disbelief. "I saved it, earned it, did the work myself." For a long moment, Dad was silent. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "He's right, Susan. Look at this place." And in his tone, for the first time in my life, I heard something new. Not pity, not dismissal, respect. Inside the cabin, the air still smelled of fresh pine and paint. I watched my parents step through the doorway, their eyes darting from the loft to the tiny kitchen, from the solar controls to the shelves I'd built with my own hands. Sarah hovered near the window, her presence grounding me. Dad ran a hand along the smooth wood of the table I'd sanded for days. "You did all this?" "With help, yeah," I answered. "But no handouts, no shortcuts. Just me learning, working, figuring it out." For the first time in my life, he didn't rush to point out a flaw. He nodded slowly, the weight of his silence different now. Mom, on the other hand, looked unsettled. "You should have called us back," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "We were worried." "Were you?" I asked softly. "Or were you just uncomfortable with the silence?" Her lips parted, but no words came. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. My existence here on 5 acres of land they hadn't bought, in a cabin I'd built without their help, was the loudest statement I could ever make. "I don't need your approval anymore," I said finally. "I don't need your money. I'm good. Actually good for the first time in my life." The words felt like unlocking a door that had been bolted shut inside me. Dad's gaze lingered on me, conflicted. Regret flickered across his face. "I was wrong about you," he admitted quietly. "About what success looks like." Tyler shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "I told them they should have helped you too," he offered. "You still took it," I reminded him. "What was I supposed to do? Say no to 100 grand? Fair. And yet, unfair, all the same." When we stepped back outside, the sun was sinking low, spilling amber light across the clearing. My cabin glowed against the backdrop of towering firs, defiant and proud. Mom reached for my arm, her voice trembling. "So, what now? Do you cut us out forever?" I shook my head slowly. "Maybe not forever. But if you want a relationship with me, it has to be different. Boundaries. Respect. No more comparisons. No more golden child versus failure. I won't play that role anymore." Dad nodded, his voice thick. "That's fair." Mom didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. As they left, Tyler hung back. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry, Danny, For real this time. Sorry for not seeing it sooner. I met his eyes. For once there wasn't resentment between us, just recognition. Thanks, I said simply. And I meant it. When the truck finally rumbled away, Sarah slipped her arm through mine. How do you feel? Tired. Relieved. Proud. All of it, I admitted. She smiled gently. That's fair. You did well today. We sat together on the porch as the last light faded, silence wrapping around us, not heavy, but peaceful. This was my life now. My property, my cabin, my story. Built not from their approval, but from my own resilience. Maybe someday I'd let them back in. Maybe not. But either way, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was no longer the failure. I was no longer the forgotten son. I was Daniel, and I was enough.